Hey, welcome to the show. I am your host, Mike Hatch, and today is Devotional Day. And I will be elaborating on and bringing biblical perspective to some things that were shared in our interview this last Monday from Chuck Verrett, who is the founder of the Reclaim Project. Man, what an incredible thing they're doing in Beaver County. And man, I hope you listened. If you didn't, go back. It is absolutely inspirational, and I think could prove to be a model for many other areas in Western Pennsylvania in order to reclaim, redeem, and revitalize certain areas of Western Pennsylvania. Now, one of the things that Chuck mentioned, he was, of course, humble in how he said it. He said that he thinks that people should rather, instead of using their strengths, use their weaknesses to honor God and serve Him. And he used his son as an example. He used me as an example. Someone who came out of an addiction to pornography, and then I wrote a book, and I now get the opportunity to disciple and speak to every so often, not very often, but just to share my story of weakness, falling into pornography addiction, and the way it nearly destroyed my marriage before it started. But that is clearly a sin and a weakness that I am now using to share with other people in terms of how God's grace impacted my life and can impact yours or others' lives. And of course, that is what Chuck was referring to, is people sharing from their weaknesses and developing a ministry to others for the sake of the gospel by virtue of that. And no doubt that is absolutely powerful. And I so respect and love Chuck and his heart in sharing that. However, that in no way discredits the ways that Chuck and his partner Nick are impacting Beaver County by leveraging their own unique gifts, talents, and abilities, or strengths. And the way I look at it is it's their weaknesses, their sin, that has brought them both to the cross to be dependent on God's grace and has motivated them now to leverage their strengths for the sake of those who are marginalized or the more vulnerable populations. But I wanted to elaborate on that point using the third redemptive economic principle. And just to review, we are looking at the 5 redemptive economic principles under the first category, which is God's dominion and our stewardship. Now, I'm going to read through the first 3 just to review. Principle number 1 was that we acknowledge God's dominion over all resources and the authority of Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit. Our role through secondary sovereignty granted to us by God is to steward His resources. Principle number 2, we trust in God's goodness, living with an abundance mentality and enthusiasm to be fruitful and multiply. And now today we'll talk about principle number 3, which is as stewards of God's resources, we invest in what we know and understand, and what allows us to leverage our wealth of knowledge and unique God-given gifts. This is really important because so many of us as Christians have abdicated this responsibility by offloading a lot of our fruits of our labor, the money that we've earned through our day jobs, to the stock market or to our retirement funds, instead of taking that seed and reinvesting it in ways that leverage our unique talents, abilities, and wealth of knowledge. And as I mentioned in a previous devotional, a lot of this comes out of fear. We've been convinced that we don't have what it takes, or that we don't have the tolerance for risk to step out and be entrepreneurs. And yet, that's not true. God calls all of us to be entrepreneurs in some way, shape, or form, to enter into, to entree into a journey, an adventure of creation, to produce value for others, to lay claim to the creation mandate, and then to preneur or prende, to grasp new knowledge and understanding based on that experiment. Now, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 7 says this. It says, "The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and of sober mind, so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling." So it's setting up here the context of love and grace in community. And this is where this needs to take place. That it is not in isolation somewhere, but it is within the context of relationships. Redemptive Economics is completely listener-supported and dependent on the contributions of listeners. If you resonate with the message of Redemptive Economics and want to support the cause, there are 3 ways you can partner with us. The first is you can subscribe to the podcast for $5 a month and unlock all the amazing interviews and content without the interruption of advertisements. Secondly, you can donate to Redemptive Economics, either making a one-time gift or supporting monthly to help us offset the production costs and reach more people for the sake of the gospel. Lastly, if you're a business, you can choose to advertise with us. Right now, we're offering a limited number of spots for sponsorships for the first year at $150 per month or $1,800 for the year. I would be so grateful for your partnership. Check out the show notes for all the links that will lead to more information about how to support our mission to empower Christian entrepreneurs. Verse 10, it says, "Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." So in Chuck Verrett's case, he is leveraging the gifts and knowledge that he has based on his business experience in order to serve others as a faithful steward of God's grace. And that just happens to be the form in which it's taken for Chuck and his partner Nick in the Reclaim project. Of course, there are others that I'm sure will come along with them in this endeavor to maybe play a role in discipling these prisoners or prisoners in transition back into life to help from a pastoral perspective. There will be others who have monetary means and have been afflicted by affluence and are willing to invest the seed, the excess seed that they have, to benefit this project. Of course, there might be others who are knowledgeable in different ways that would lend that knowledge to, again, faithfully serve others as a steward of God's grace. All of these different things in the various forms of God's grace. Verse 11, "If anyone speaks, they should do so as one who speaks the very words of God. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. To him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen." So in all these things that we do, we don't do them for ourselves. Our motives are so critical here. Our motives should be to please God, to serve God, and to do it with the strength that God provides us. Now again, sadly, many of us have been convinced that for whatever reason, we aren't the ones who should be doing this. But I would actually argue that way more Christians should be willing to take their stored seed and invest it in projects like this and other businesses in order to produce fruit and contribute to human flourishing wherever they happen to be. I've been spending some time in Ecclesiastes recently, and these verses in chapter 11 have absolutely rocked me over and over again as I revisit this. Here in chapter 11 of Ecclesiastes, it starts out, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. It says, starting in verse 1, "Ship your grain across the sea. After many days you may receive a return. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land." Now, the context within which this was written is not the same as today, because unfortunately what's done today is financial advisors will take this passage and apply it to your portfolio in the stock market and say, see, this is how we diversify your portfolio. We put it in all sorts of different ventures so that it's not at a greater risk. But this passage did not have the stock market in mind. The stock market as we know it today did not exist back then. This is talking about taking your money, your excess seed, the profit that you have made, maybe through your 9-to-5, maybe through a different venture, and reinvesting it in other businesses where you are locally, not just giving your money over to someone else who doesn't know you, doesn't have your best interest in mind, and is just looking at the bottom line. How much do you know about the money that is invested in the stock market on your behalf? Are you aware of where it goes? Are you aware what companies that are utilizing the money that you provided them? Are they utilizing it in a way that is redemptive or in a way that conflicts with God's kingdom? These are really important questions. Most of us are not in the minutia of our investments within the stock market. Probably because it's a little overwhelming. Probably because there's so much you'd have to learn. And therefore, we offload that responsibility to someone else to do it for us, in hopes that by the time it's time to retire and we're done working and we're ready to be purely consumeristic, we will have the means to be able to accomplish that. Seneca Hills Bible Camp and Retreat Center is a hidden gem located just north of Pittsburgh in Venango County. Personally, when I attended their men's weekend, I was blown away by the beauty of the surroundings, the quality of the facilities, and the superiority of the cuisine. This is not your typical camp food, folks. Seneca Hills hosts year-round retreats and conferences, but their true passion is summer camp, where campers, both kids and adults, escape the everyday tyranny of screens and distractions and immerse themselves in 250 acres of God's gorgeous creation. Go to SenecaHills.org or call my good buddy, Executive Director Lyndon Fowler, to learn more about how Seneca Hills Bible Camp and Retreat Center can help you, your kids, or your business create unforgettable memories, meaningful friendships, and a deeper understanding of God's love. Ecclesiastes is talking about something very different. It's actually talking about investing in multiple business ventures in order that you might receive a return. This is, again, another iteration of the creation mandate that God calls us to. Then it goes on in verse 3, it says, "If clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where it falls, there it will lie. Whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap." The point that these verses are making is that we are not to wait for perfect circumstances before taking our money and investing it in different ventures. Instead, like clouds that are full of water, in the sense that we have seed to offer up as investments to other ventures, we should be willing to pour that out and entrust it to the Lord to bring growth for the benefit of human flourishing. Of course, verse 4, whoever watches the wind will not plant, whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. The idea is if you don't take the risk, if you don't take the seed, the money that you've been entrusted to through the work that you've done, the labor you've produced, then you're not going to see a return. And of course, we want to wait to make sure we get a sure thing, which is why a lot of us instead direct our funds to the stock market because it seems to be a more sure bet. However, that undermines our faith in God. Verse 5 goes on and says, "As you do not know the path of the wind or how the body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things." The point is that, look, God is working, and we're just called to be faithful and to sow that seed for the purposes of God's kingdom. This is why I believe as Christians, we should be taking ownership or responsibility of the money that we've been blessed with, the profit that we've been blessed with, and to keep it close to us in a sense, to where we know exactly the way it's being utilized. Because ultimately, we are going to be held accountable for that. So, verse 6, it says, "Sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle. For you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well." So it's acknowledging the fact that nobody knows what's going to do well or not. The idea is to invest in several ventures in hopes that maybe one or several of them will be profitable. Unfortunately, our corrupt economic system makes this very, very hard for us, even as Christians. Our debt-based, inflationary, corrupt monetary system makes it very hard. It twists the incentives, perverts the incentives, so that we instead are incentivized not to produce or take risk, but instead to storehouse, to hold on tightly to what we have and do whatever we can and work in whatever ways the state or the system would tell us to, as opposed to being autonomous and self-sovereign, in order to, quote, have a sure return or have very little to no risk. That is not the way of the kingdom of God. Jeff Doherty with Allstate Insurance has the distinction of being the very first sponsor of the Redemptive Economics podcast, and I couldn't be happier to promote his services. I've known Jeff for many years now, both as his pastor and friend. And man, I can say with confidence that he is a man of strong faith who aligns well with the Redemptive Economics values. So reach out to Jeff. He can offer you options for a wide variety of coverage and services. He's committed to helping Pittsburgh residents assess their immediate and long-term needs and choose options that will help you achieve your goals. When you want to explore options for protecting your home, personal property, or financial future, Jeff Doherty is your guy. You'll find Jeff's contact information in the show notes. Hey, go grab a cup of coffee with him, get to know him, even if it's just to review your current coverage in case you need to make adjustments. And I promise you're going to love Jeff every bit as much as I do. Instead, we are, as stewards of God's resources, to invest in what we know and understand and what allows us to leverage our wealth of knowledge and unique God-given gifts. So this is the thing that a lot of people don't talk about. Many financial advisors will talk about what your risk threshold is. How much risk are you willing to take? And that is a very vague question. And of course, everybody has a different threshold about the amount of risk that they're willing to take. However, this changes dramatically when you start thinking about where your wealth of knowledge, skill, and expertise lies. Within that sphere of influence, you can actually mitigate your risk tremendously. There is still risk involved, of course. However, if you focus on investing in ventures that, again, are closer in proximity to you, maybe locally in the community, that allow you to leverage your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge, and your expertise, and your gifts and your talents, you are going to be way better at utilizing those resources than someone else who would not have those same talents and abilities. Do you see how this fiat system, this corrupt monetary system, has brainwashed us, in a sense, to put our money into things that are better for the collective versus what is best for God's kingdom? Because look, you are the one who's going to be held accountable. You are the one who's going to stand before God and give an account for the resources, not just money, but all the resources that have passed through you as a conduit of God's blessing. Will you be able to give an account for it? Are those things that you allotted your resources to going to stand the test of God's judgment, or will they be burnt up? All right, one last time. Principle number 3 under God's dominion and our stewardship is that as stewards of God's resources, we invest in what we know and understand and what allows us to leverage our wealth of knowledge and unique God-given gifts. All right, guys, thank you for listening. Next week, we're going to talk about principle number 4, that we are active, not passive investors of God's resources as stewards who will be held accountable. Let's get to work!